As I said, we are swapping things around, which means we're now going to the business news. And Brian Quinn is joining us here on set. Brian, you're starting in the UK, aren't you? A major business lobbying group trying to put even more pressure, if there couldn't be any enough already, on Theresa May over Brexit.
That's right. The British Chambers of Commerce has published a list of urgent questions for the UK government as Britain's exit from the EU approaches. Among those, whether incoming goods will be subject to new customs procedures at border points, whether UK regulation checks will be recognised in the EU, and whether companies will be able to transfer staff between the UK and the EU. Well, Theresa May is gathering her ministers Friday to hammer out a white paper policy document on the government's negotiating positions. Critics, including Labour opposition leaders, say that divisions in May's cabinet are slowing the process and endangering the results. May says she'll deliver for the British people. Here she is.
Our white paper will set out detailed proposals for a sustainable and close future relationship between the UK and the EU. A partnership that means that the UK will leave the single market and customs union, but a partnership which supports our shared prosperity and security.
Well, checking in on the markets now, European indexes opening higher. Investors showing some relief over a migration deal in Germany that should soothe the crisis in Angela Merkel's coalition government. We see the London FTSE 100 up 0.5%. Same for the CAC 40 here in Paris. The Frankfurt DAX just above the flat line. Asian indexes mixed Tuesday as investors look ahead to a Friday deadline for new tariffs to come into effect between the U.S. and China. Tokyo's Nikkei just under the flat line. The Kospi getting 0.5% above the flat line. Shanghai Composite with a tiny bit of gain. Hong Kong's Hang Seng way down. Well, earlier, France 24 spoke with Timothy McDonald in Singapore about how the trade tension between the U.S. and China could even deepen.
The Chinese markets in particular are being hit. And of course, it's only a few days until US tariffs on $34 billion worth of Chinese goods take effect. And we expect an equal response from China in return. Interestingly, the yuan has also headed south, which could, I guess, offset the damage of those tariffs a little bit. You know, if Chinese goods are cheaper to the American buyer because of the currency, then perhaps the tariffs won't sting quite as much. But of course, that doesn't really seem to, I guess, take the edge off for investors at all, because it could also mean that if it is indeed a deliberate policy, and it may well be, we just don't really know at this stage, then we might be looking at a currency war in addition to a trade war.
Well, here in France, Medef, the country's largest business lobby group, is meeting today to elect their next president. The new leader, often referred to in French media as the boss of bosses, is expected to push for lower public spending and production taxes. The race pitting telecoms entrepreneur Geoffroy Roux de Bézieux against construction equipment chief Alexandre Sobel. Well, for more on this story, we cross now to France 24 business editor Stephen Carroll at the Paris Event Center, where the vote is being held. Stephen, can you talk to us a bit about Medef's role and why this position of president is so important?
Well, Medef plays a very key role in many parts of French social dialogue. It is the biggest business lobby group, as you said. They have around 123,000 members, business members, as part of the organisation, and their delegates will be those that are voting in today's presidential election. Now, it is still a small proportion of the 3 million businesses that exist here in France, but importantly, the members of Medef do count some of the biggest companies in the country. It counts for around 8.5 million employees, and really the president of Medef is seen as the voice of business, both in dialogue with the government, in dialogue with the unions, but also as a national figurehead in terms of the person who speaks for the business lobby. This election is coming at an interesting time for the organisation, though. It's somewhat having to look at its own identity and its own role in French society. It does, of course, get involved in those important government negotiations with unions, but that's something that current President Emmanuel Macron wants to change. He wants to reduce the role of social dialogue over some key areas of negotiation. A tricky one that's coming on the way will be the reform of France's unemployment benefit system, something that Medef had a key voice in the past. The other issue that the new president will have to face is, of course, how they boost membership of new businesses. There is a long tradition in certain sectors of being members of Medef, but with a start-up scene that's burgeoning here in the French capital, there really is also a demand for Medef to embrace those companies too.
A lot coming up in the future then for them. Well, the two candidates come from some rather different backgrounds. What can you tell us about them and their candidacies?
the two candidates left out of the field of originally 9, Geoffrey Roux de Bézieux, who is the founder of companies like Virgin Mobile. He founded the Phone House, which was then bought by Carphone Warehouse. He's really seen as being part of the technology side of French business. He's a big tech investor. He's supported by 100 CEOs of French tech companies. In his candidacy, he's being seen really as, I suppose, the more modern and future-looking side. He's a former vice president of Medef as well, and he's running up against Alexandre Sobo, who is from, I suppose, the more traditional side of Medef. He's an engineer. He was the president of the Metal Workers Industry Association until now. So coming from two very different segments of the Medef membership, but they're largely running on the same sort of platform. They want to overhaul the organisation. They want to make sure that its representation is more relevant, and also to ensure that it retains that key role in social dialogue over those issues, particularly reforms being proposed by President Macron.
Well, Stephen, thanks very much. We'll have more from Stephen throughout today from the Medef election, and that's it for business. I'll hand it back to you, Stuart.
Thanks, Brian.